and then I'm just going to do one last check. I'm going to start streaming now. And we're live.
Nerds,
What's up?
how's it going?
We'll see if anybody shows up for this. I imagine you will. You have fans.
I do?
Yeah,
I think so.
you have supporters.
Who knows?
So, yeah, who are you?
It's a big question. My name is John Harness. I'm a game designer, I guess, and a game thinker and a tweeter. I'm also an artist and an arts educator, and I live in Chicago. My pronouns are he, him.
Are you a docent?
I have been a docent for many years, but I've done other museum jobs too.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, you're an arts nerd who's in games and does game art shit. But
That's right.
we're gonna talk about game art, and we're also gonna talk about trad games as art.
Oh, hell yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think this will be good because you and I have a similar vibe about, like, I spend a lot of my time on, like, not to overblow it, but sort of like the weird end of the RPG industry. But I also spend a lot of time in the not so weird. And I think that, like you, I think that there's plenty of weird stuff going on in the so-called trad game land that is just either like forgotten about or ignored. So
yeah, I mean it is very much. It's almost like the outsider artist made a click, and now the insiders are viewed by that click as the outsiders. Um, but yeah, no,
I don't know. I don't know if I would frame it that way, but maybe I would. Maybe I would. It depends on who you mean by each of those different clicks.
Sure, sure, that's fair. Um, we're both kind of like old men in the arts game space, but young
What?
men.
What?
Yeah,
You said this about me several times. You keep calling yourself this sort of old man
like,
and including me in this category, and I don't know why.
because you are
Yeah?
like
By
you
what metric?
cycles on Earth alive.
Okay, all right. And that has to do with my involvement in art scene how?
You're in the art scene and you're old, so you're an old man in the art scene.
I don't know. I mean, like, what work is framing us both as old men doing for your project, Joe?
I think it positions part of this is, in a sense, figuring out taxonomies of social involvement.
Uh-huh.
Um, and how those change perception of the craft and perception of the medium.
Yeah, sure. And so I guess I just doubt whether the taxonomic category of old man is in any way relevant. Especially because I'm fucking 30.
Sure, same. You're the same age.
Yeah.
I think it's useful as like a transition signifier, right? Like I think
Transition from what to what? Also, it sounds like you're putting us both solidly in a category. This is how I fuck, by the way.
it's fair. I believe
Somebody
it.
comes at me and they're like, guess what? I'm the top. And I'm like, you think that?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's part of why I think your bed is behind you for this. Is I think you were setting a mood.
Those are just material circumstances, not.
I don't know. I think the thing is that when neither of us are in a category, and I think a portion of that has to do with
Okay, so
what
first of all, I win. First of all, I win that argument.
Sure.
Second of all, keep going.
I think part of why we are not in a category is because we occupy a liminal space, and that liminal space has to do with, in part, age.
Okay, well, that's a more interesting something to say, I think. Tell me, what does our age have to do with anything? I mean, not in a prove to me that you're saying something reasonable.
Sure,
You've
yeah.
now done that.
Yeah.
You've now done that. But say more. Also, you have a death hat on right now.
I do have a death hat on.
Speaking of the vibe, everybody, before you came online, we were talking about the vibe. I was trying to figure out what lights to turn on and stuff. And you maybe can't see this because it's the future and you're reading a book, but Joe has a hat on that says death in a kind of metal font.
I do, and my t-shirt says Team Krampus.
I see. Okay.
So that's my vibe right now.
So anyway, back to transitional categories
Sure. So
or non-categories.
one of the ways, and I don't think this is limited to our medium, right? Or the medium that we are, not to limit us as people involved with games, right?
Uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
as people who are in some way involved in games within the confines of games, there is not an age, but a generational signifier, right? People of many ages occupied what we consider the Forge cohort.
Uh-huh.
Being part of the Forge cohort means something absent the individual's actual work.
Yeah, I agree with that kind of statement, although I'm very curious who your list of uh, um, cohort people is.
It was specifically in the Forge.
Yeah.
Um, Luke, uh, Vince, Clint,
Mm-hmm.
Jared Sorensen, Ron.
Or a bell. Yes or no? Avery Alder, yes or no?
Yes, Avery.
Okay.
Aura, probably not. Um, John Harper. Um, there are people who were active at that time, and I think had direct interaction with those people, who I would not. Right, there were people who were familiar with Ken Height,
Uh-huh.
Chicago area people who were Forge people,
Mm-hmm.
who ran in the same circles.
Yeah, sure.
I would never say Ken was a Forge person.
Yeah, sure.
Or John Wick. John Wick was not a Forge person. He ended up having a handful of projects. Orc World could have been a Forge game if made by somebody else. But I would not
Yeah,
say
sure.
that John Wick is part of the Forge cohort.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I think in the modern day, specifically in the Twitter discourse weird scene, right?
The Twitter discourse weird scene.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to call it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it covers. Discourse is a thing that Fiona came up with.
Well,
Where does
I
where does
didn't know it.
but
That's a
but
word people have used for discourse for a long time.
like
She used emojis for it.
yeah, fair. But I would say that if you went through Twitter logs of games Twitter, we don't use discourse in the same way prior to making the emojis for it. That blew the fuck up. As someone who and you are as well. We're people who are on Twitter all the fucking time. That seems
I'm
like a
actually I'm not anymore. I
well, you're
was.
not. You were, and that is how we initially became acquainted.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say prior to that, it wasn't. People were having discourses, but we weren't
Mm-hmm.
calling it the discourse. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean that's part of sort of how naming works. I mean that's sort of how lyric games have been working. For those of you reading this who don't know, I'm the person who came up with the phrase lyric game. Um, for the good and the bad and the ugly of that. And the mostly good. Let me be clear, the mostly good. But
mhm.
it is a thing where suddenly you start talking about what is you name a thing, and then you're talking about what's inside and outside of the thing, and you lose in a way the death knell of something is to name it right. Um,
I mean, that's part of why I'm wearing a death hat.
well,
And I'm
so
here to.
anyway, we're drifting. Let's get back to this. So you think you and I are in a transitional category,
I
even
think
though
we
we
are
are
in a
both
transitional
even though
category.
we're both very much, let's say, on Twitter in a group of a vaguely defined everybody-ness who were all engaged in this thing called discourse. I don't know how that makes us in a transitional category. That seems
No,
to
I
me
think we.
that seems to say that we're in the middle of a pack.
uh, no, because even then, right? This is my point about discourse being a term solidified by Fiona, right? Where does Fiona sit? Where does Fiona sit currently? Where does Fiona sit historically?
Mm-hmm.
Fiona historically sits in the OSR.
Sure.
Fiona is akin to Emmy Allen for most of Fiona's history.
Mm-hmm.
I would not say Fiona exists in the OSR right now. But think Fiona would probably fight somebody who said that she existed in the OSR right now.
Sure.
Fiona occupies a liminal space within a band, right? Fiona is not in the liminal space between art games and trad games, but Fiona is still in a liminal space within trad games. Part of that liminal space, I think, weirdly to say this because Fiona's not actually been around for that long, but is Fiona's seniority. I do not think it is purely Fiona's body of work. I think it is the, like...
By seniority, do you mean been aroundness, which you just, if so, you just said the opposite of that, or do you mean age, or what do you mean?
I think been aroundness. And that's the funny thing, right? Because Fiona hasn't actually been around that long.
This is why I'm questioning your statement.
And yet I think if you were to ask why do people take Fiona so seriously? Not that she shouldn't be, right? Mm-hmm. She has good ideas. But I don't think it is... I think people view Fiona and Riley very differently, even if they were to say the exact same thing.
Sure.
Part of that, to me, is Fiona's seniority. I think within the lyric game scene, which you named, and in part probably have cause to start dying, I think if somebody who is brand new and figuring out the landscape of what had come before in the past year of lyric games, you would sit in a position of essentially seniority. Even though by no means are you an established player in the wider hobby.
Sure, yeah.
Within the vertical slice I'm describing, that marks you as what I think of as an old man.
Okay, I think that I have gotten you to back up a lot from the category of old man, say something that means not what old man means, and then come back with a different something to say.
How does that not what old man means?
Because old man, it imports all these, like, fucking Cheers references. I don't know, you tell me what an old man is. You're the one throwing around the term.
It's a man who is old.
Okay, but now you're telling me that it's a person...
But, like, by dint of being old, what does age confer normatively, socially?
Yeah, and you've charted out sort of...
so that's the implications.
About how long
that's the implications of old.
You're saying it's about how long people have been in a scene.
I'm saying it is part of the perception. It is part of the perception, right? That is the point of demarcating, right? And that's the thing. Within their respective verticals, I think you could probably look at someone like Ken Hite, who's been around for like 30 years, and someone like Fiona, very similarly, despite a 28, 27-year gulf in their actual seniority.
I don't know in what way I would look at them the same.
I think within their specific verticals, they occupy essentially privileged locations. And part of the privileged location that they occupy has to do with this. Which is not to say that it isn't an earned position.
I don't know, I think you can slice a pepperoni pizza lots of ways and have a piece of pepperoni on it. It doesn't mean all pieces of pepperoni are the same on all the pizza. Well, that's not what I mean.
Yeah,
I don't know what I mean. All I'm saying is that the category of old man is very weird.
I don't know. I think you kind of just... my guess is you have some, like, personal reason that you don't like being called old. That's, like, mostly what I think this is.
And I think it's a bad analytic category.
Fair.
But in any case, you were comparing us as liminal people. So now you've told the story about how Fiona is both liminal and yet also the equivalent to someone who's been in the scene and at the top of the industry for 30 years. Okay. But what about your liminality? Tell me more about that.
I'm not this interview subject. You've had me talking.
Yeah, I am, and the big John energy is me asking you these questions.
God, they're not doing that. I mean, I'll give you a little bit, but we're flipping this after.
Okay, all right. I've seen that before.
I don't know. I think my liminality is similar to yours.
Okay.
We're not firmly known for the work we've actually produced in terms of discrete units of game.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a perfectly reasonable statement. Yeah,
Sure.
sure. Yeah, there was a hot second where I was the weirdo making sex games, and that hasn't been true for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
Because I've been working on other projects. I've been writing on much bigger sort of trad projects, which I can not really talk about. But anyway, so I've been working on that, and that's just taken a lot of my sort of ability to pump out a bunch of tiny games. Sort of not the wind out of my sails. I still have lots of ideas, but it's every time I sit down to write one of them, I feel guilty about being behind in something else, so I don't write them. And the whole time I've been in a mode where um, I think of when I was pumping out all those tiny sex games, I was actively a curator at a tiny queer art gallery. And so I think I come to this whole enterprise with this kind of curatorial, editorial gaze, which I think that's very similar about us too, um, where, I want to do things like sort of putting my finger out in the wind and see where things are blowing. I want to be looking around and being like saying like this person is doing really interesting things that no one's talking about. And the thing that's come out of that really is that I came up with a good word for lyric games because I was thinking about a scene, I was really a part of it. And I said like, hey, I'm tired of saying, all those weird tiny micro games kind of about emotion, and I just needed a fucking word for it, right? And so like that's been my sort of contribution. But yeah, I've been around and I know a lot of people for a lot of reasons. I've worked the Gen Con floor, so I'm around.
Have you?
Um, yeah,
Like for a company? This
yeah.
is news to me.
I worked with last year. I worked with Pelgrane. Um, I was running credit cards at their booth all of last year, and I plan to theoretically this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the problem with having an AVI that's not your face.
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely possible. I was just like, I don't know
Okay,
who
this
that.
is what makes you an old man and me not an old man, is that you called it an AVI. What the hell does that mean? Maybe you have something that makes you want to say that you are an old man.
I mean, I have a lot of white hair.
Sure, sure.
Um, when did you start getting involved with games?
Ask a more specific question.
No.
Okay, well, do you want the like when I was a kid I got involved in playing house kind of thing? Or do you want the I live a block away from Ken Height and we hang out on his back porch all the time story? Like what version of the story do you want?
Yes.
Okay. Um, it was a dark and stormy night,
Yes.
and I was at my friend Tegan's house in rural Missouri. I grew up in extremely rural Missouri, and certain time of year in rural Missouri is tornado season, and it was deeply tornado season. And we were in Tegan's dad's room, his like office, really playing around with the computer, playing some old war game. I forget the name of. And there was a big crash, boom, lightning strike, and the sirens started going off. And I swear to God, a book fell off the shelf, and it was like a 3-ring binder that fell open on the floor, and all these pages fluttered out. And it was, and my friend's dad sort of rushed in the room and said, "Hey, is everybody okay? We need to like go in the basement because there's a storm happening." And I was like, "What is this ancient tome?" And he said, "Oh, those are all my notes from my college D&D campaign." And that was when my friendship with Tegan stopped because I was like, forever after, I was like, "Tegan, can we hang out with your dad so he can tell me about more cool wizard stuff?" Right? I remember the first, so it wasn't that night because there really was like a storm happening, so we went and stormed. But the next time I was there, I remember being like, "Yeah, tell me about all this cool stuff." And the first role playing game advice I ever got was, "Don't be a bard. Like, they don't do anything." And I was like, what does this word mean? And they were like, "Oh, it's like people who like they have like a musical instrument, they sing songs and stuff." And I was like, I want to be that person. Okay, so flip forward, um, high school, college. I was still interested in playing. My own personal Bible was the third 3.5 book. Faiths and Pantheons was a big part of my upbringing because I had a lot of interest, but basically no one to play with. And I had sort of memorized that book and thought it was really cool. So I get to grad school. I start the long, slow, painful process of dropping out of grad school. And instead of finishing my papers, I found basically like the last gasp of the Forge, I would say. I found like Vincent Baker, I found Paul Sega, I found Avery Alder, a few other people, right? And I don't really know exactly the timing of when what website was sort of there or not, but I found like retro clones, for
Sure.
example. Um,
This what like early
this was 2000,
2010s?
like 2012,
Okay.
2012,
Yeah.
2015. And I was like, hold up, this is what I need in my life, this stuff, as opposed to grad school. Um, there was a brief period where the only thing that me dropping out of grad school was a whole big thing. I was very depressed for a while, and the only thing that was sort of getting me out of bed was I started going to play D&D at the local comic book store, and then I through that started running their kids game. So I ran like BX and Dungeon World and a few other things for their kids game for a few years, and that's sort of when I started getting well, then sort of two stories start happening at once, which is I'm running this kids game. I'm getting really interested in sort of what I'm now finding is kind of indie games in the kind of post-forge story game kind of mold.
Sure.
That's I'm playing things like oh, I can see the cover art in my brain. I found like Killing Puppies for Satan and stuff like
Okay. Sure.
that. And I was like, this is super cool. Then fifth edition starts coming out, and all at the same time, I meet Darcy Ross, who a lot of people know. We become quick friends. We meet through a mutual friend of ours who for a while was my roommate. And then I also meet Ken, and me meeting Ken is a large part of my life in this because, like I mentioned before, Ken Height lives a block that way. I could stick my head out the window and shout, and he could hear me. Right? Um, and so it was through a lot of, I started going to Gen Con with this sort of friend group. And it sort of took off from there. And then I went to a Catacon 2000 and something or other. I met Taylor LeBreche and some other people in a weird sex game that was a podcast. They were playing Orabelle's Bug Fuck. I'm in a podcast of Bug Fuck. And everybody was like, you got to get on Twitter. And I was like, oh, I don't want to get on Twitter. And they're like, that's where we all live. And I was like, okay. And here I
Fine.
am. Here I am. Several years later, I'm coining words for themes in
See,
role-playing video games.
both versions of that story were good, and
Uh-huh.
if you made me pick, I would have only gotten one of them.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Um,
yeah. I mean, so in terms of having a lot on your plate, I get not being able to talk about the trad game
mhm.
stuff, but you did just announce
Well,
that
I
you were.
can't talk about it. It's just I feel Robin D. Laws has been a saintly man to me in that I owe him a lot of words, a lot, and I have for a long time.
Okay.
And it's been a learning process of me doing all that. But I'm in the midst of finishing all it up. So I'm working on the Yellow King Bestiary for his Yellow King
Oh,
RPG.
nice.
Other people contributing to the Bestiary. You might be thinking, "Wow, John, that was announced a long time ago." Yeah, you're right. Um, and I'm also co-writing Hellenistica with Ken.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing.
Um,
Yeah.
how's
So, huh?
how's trad game development for you?
Very weird. Very not weird. It's just new. I'm learning a lot of skills really fast. Like I said, I've been. Let me tell you something Raman Dilaz told me when I was basically apologizing to him at last Gen Con about not having a lot of words done for him. And he said something that some of them people might take badly, but I want to underscore the sort of like gentle Canadian old manishness of Raman Dilaz, who I think is accurately and unweirdly called an old man. And he basically said something which was that a lot of people who are coming into the industry right now, he called it this word I had not used. I think it's from Watership Down. He said people are tharning, which is that you get present. A tharning is when like a small animal in Watership Down gets like a bunny rabbit encounters a wolf and suddenly like seizes up and doesn't know how to proceed, right? And that might come across as patronizing to people, but that was exactly what was happening to me to a T. It was, hey, John, do all these words. And I was like, I want to, but how, right? I was kind of, it was reigniting a bunch of my stuff that had happened to me during my very dramatic and bad grad school period. Um, so, so it's just a very different kind of style of work that I'm still learning about. I mean, don't ask me to give you some sort of insight into how to do it. Ask me that once I
Oh,
turn
no,
into
no, no, no. I
some people. But
wouldn't.
yeah, I'm just saying, my relationship to that is sort of evolving, right?
Mhm.
what's both the fun of it and not the fun of it is that you are writing one part of a big thing, right? With microgames and stuff, you have one idea, you sort of put it out, it's out there, right? Um, this is like things you think on for months, right? You think on it for a long time, and you keep thinking, you keep tinkering. So it's really great, and it's cool, and I'm glad that I've been able to be involved in it. And I am working to turn those words in. Hoping to untharn myself.
Do you think you'd do it again?
Um, I have had, I don't know how to answer that question, but I have had thoughts like, is this what I want to be doing? And there are
Sure.
days when I'm like, hell yeah, this is what I'd be doing. This is sweet. And there's days when I'm like, no, John, don't. What are you doing? Right? There are days when I'm like, you know what I want to do instead of writing all these words? I want to go run a weird indie criticism magazine. That's what I want to do.
Well, it looks like
Yeah,
you're doing both.
yeah. So that's where I am. All my best ideas are when I take a day off from doing that other writing, and then I'm like, what if? And then, damn it, SideMechGen's happening, or whatever.
It's how this whole project started,
Yeah,
so I get it.
yeah. So to talk about that thing for a second, a thing that I announced like yesterday, which I came up with a name for today, so very new, hot off the presses, is that I'm trying to get a criticism mag going, tentatively called Knucklebone Magazine. Um, and the reason for that is that going back to me having this sort of curatorial, editorial gaze on the scene, for better or worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that there is space for a lot of sort of deep thought going on that's not the emoji discourse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Personally, I find a lot of that really exhausting and politically uninteresting. And also, I think that it privileges a certain kind of thinker and a certain kind of writer and a certain kind of person who can be present on the internet in a certain kind of way.
Sure.
And that's like not in itself bad.
It's just lopsided.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there are ways in which I don't want to get into this place which is say something like there's none of this long form thought thinking. Of course there is. It's
Sure.
going on, but it's going on in sort of like different blogs and stuff. And in a way, I'm just making another group blog. That's
Yeah,
true.
I mean there are a handful of publications, right?
Yeah,
Shout out Analog Game Studies
yeah,
and
yeah,
like the
sure.
handful of RPG things that get put out, but I would say there is a comparative lack.
Yeah, I agree. And as someone who like has been in various parts of various scenes in sort of indie RPG land, I've had lots of conversations with well-informed people where they say, "I wish we had a place to put more long-form writing." And I'm not saying that I have the sort of silver bullet for that. I just think, "Hey, I maybe know how to do that. Let me try it." And I have this sort of personal motto. It's not my only personal motto, but one of my personal mottos is to only play games that I've already won.
Hmm.
This comes out of my obsession with time magic and immortal vampires, essentially. Um,
Okay.
but I think, play a game or do a move that you win no matter what happens, right?
Sure.
So, for example, if I live in a world where there is not, I don't want to say not robust because there is a robust happening, but there's not just like a place where a bunch of people are contributing writing. Even if I start something and it fails in a blaze of light, at least there's one more data point on the
Mm-hmm.
Wikipedia in the sky, the Wikipedia page in the sky for people doing indie RPG criticism. At least there's one more data point, and sometimes all anybody can do is put one more data point on the chart, right? And so even if Knucklebone magazine or whatever I end up actually calling it is only a thing that happened for one bright second and then totally dissolved or whatever, still, I've already basically won the game of moving the ball forward 1 percentage point.
Sure.
And that's what I'm trying to do, right? And I'm very excited because I think like if I start saying stuff and get other people who, you know, like I'm gonna curate people that think like me and that have ideas like me, right? And
Sure.
for good and for worse. And so what's exciting is that if someone says, "Hey, John and these people are wrong," what I hope happens is that they start their own magazine. That's what I want. I don't want to rule. I don't want a fucking monopoly of the scene discourse. No, what a nightmare. No, I want all of my friends to have their cool, weird zines that they're passing around. Here's a thing. One time I heard a certain trad uh, uh, designer who will remain nameless said a very reasonable thing to a younger friend of mine,
Okay.
which was, hey, don't show up to a con being that guy trying to sell your game out of a backpack. And I thought to myself in that moment, I was like, that's who I want to be. I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I was like, that's it.
Yeah. That's the goal.
That's the goal. And I want everybody to do that, right?
So, first, immediately, and I said this off camera, but I'm saying it for posterity now because it'll be on camera and in the book. I'm volunteering my services.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah, yeah.
Done. That's done.
Yeah.
Next, in terms of like you curating people who think like you, right?
Mhm.
Would you say a competing, competing's not the right, another magazine
Yeah.
emerged with
Yeah.
a different take?
Yeah.
Would you be opposed to them merging?
No, no, not in some sort of abstract sense. No.
Okay, gotcha. That just
You know,
the
oh, no.
way you framed it made it seem like the good was in the multiplicity rather in the internal variety.
Um, I think that that there's strength in a variety of strategies for all things, right?
Sure.
And so it would depend on how that, shook out, right?
Fair.
Um, but yeah, no, again, I'm not trying to found some sort of John Hardis media empire. Like, I want to read people's cool shit. I want people to tell me about cool shit they're doing in RPG land. Okay.
John Harness, Rupert Murdoch of RPGs.
I also don't want that. No, 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 no. Um,
um,
yeah. So merging, fucking. I want fucking crossover albums. I want super groups. I want all of it. Right?
um,
Why? Is there some competing magazine? Are you making a magazine?
no, 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 no.
Are we now having a business meeting where
God, no.
Knucklebone is meeting up with, I don't know, D47 or something?
Well, I mean, the only other one that's like recently started, I want to say, is Black Dog.
What's that? So I don't know about this. Tell me
Oh,
about this. See, this is part of it. Because as soon as you put an idea into action, suddenly everybody tells you about other people doing the same thing.
no, no,
That's
don't worry.
half the
Black
point.
Dog's only
I've
had one
already
issue.
won the game, people.
It's fair. This is what success looks like.
Yeah.
Black Dog, if I'm getting the name right, Exalted Funeral had the physical copies.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay, yeah. And I feel like people are putting out some of the coolest stuff in RPG land right now. So
yeah,
that makes
it's a
sense. 'Cause they
slightly more
they got the
OSR.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think Jared wrote something for it.
You mean Jared Sinclair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are other people putting out small, J Dragon in sort of lyric land, J Dragon, Taylor LeBreche, Jared Sinclair. People have been putting out things that I think are kind of really walking the line between like, is this me publishing a game? Is this me publishing game criticism? And I think that's all really good and rich, and I want to talk about it. I just want to take one step back further into more like, what if I was writing a music review?
Yeah.
Sort of magazine,
Straight up.
right? To do that for more sort of like,
make it very clear that it's critical.
Yeah, and that's what I want to do, right?
Yeah.
And then I want everybody to think I'm wrong, and then I want us to hash it out, and then I want our thought to be, I don't think Hegel's right all the time, but I think Hegel's right some of the time.
I think that
I'm talking about dialectics, right? The idea that you gain, I know that you don't need this explained to you because we talked about it.
It's fair. There are other people.
Yeah, the idea that ideas emerge out of talking about them. You further a conversation by having the conversation, right? That's what dialectics is. Sometimes it's fucking wrong.
It's true. Sometimes you just need people to shut the fuck up.
That's
but probably where we're sitting right now in terms of what we're talking about, what we need is more talking.
Well, no, I think what we need is more good talking.
Fair.
I think that there is a right now in all of our lives across all media, there's a great incapacity to make judgment calls, and I think that's because so many people have quite reasonably say that people making judgment calls, especially like white dudes like me making judgment calls about media, is what keeps people out of livelihoods, puts people in prison. I agree with all of those critiques. On the other hand, Taylor LeBreche, bless his heart, dear friend of mine, does RPG reviews, and he gives on his YouTube channel, and he gives all of them a 10 out of 10, and that's a hilarious bit, and I love it. But what if But what if, but what if not that? Is what I want to ask.
What if actually people get ones and twos?
Yeah, yeah.
What happens next?
Yeah, and,
Um,
and like and the best thing is like when someone who I think is having good thoughts says, "Hey John, you're fucking wrong about this," right? That one that your two should be a fucking 11, and I'll be like, "Fuck yes." And again, I don't want to make it that the critical readings I want to do are about giving things fucking Ebert style ratings. That's not really what I'm saying, but I'm using that as a stand-in for like having discussions about how things can be bad, things can be good, things can be cutting edge, things can have a regressive politics, things can have a progressive politics.
I mean,
Um,
I'm extremely here for Ebert, and people slander that man. He isn't a perfect person, but my God, we go from Pauline Kael to Ebert, and film crit becomes popularized, right? Like I'm very pro us having
Yeah,
Eberts.
sure. You know much more about film criticism in that way than I do. But I just mean that I don't mean to reduce it to the numbers.
That's fair. Um, so
I wanted to reduce it to like, is this game pushing a neoliberal agenda? If so, it's shitty and we should ignore it.
sure. Unless it's very, very open about it, in which case I am super pro that. Let me play a villain in the worst possible way, so long as you acknowledge that I'm a villain.
Okay.
Those are some of my favorite games.
I'm not saying that it can't be the villain. I just want to be the villain in a way that doesn't replicate the conditions which are bringing about the end of the world. I'm going to open my line in Google Summer Shandy now.
Nice.
If you didn't know, everyone listening to this, I've been drinking before the interview and have been drinking during the interview, and now I'm opening this beer.
John is doing the appropriate thing.
This was supposed to be, everybody, when at Gen Con, Joe was going to take me into some cool bar, and I was going to get fancy cocktails.
Yeah, or I was going to make you... What was your drink, Negronis?
I do like Negronis, yeah. I think we you were like, John, that's too much money.
Yeah, I was like, I can't buy you...
Hotel room Negronis.
Yeah, I'll buy you some like Top Shelf, and I'll just make you Negronis.
Yeah, I'm ready.
And then the world ended, and so now John's drinking canned drinks.
Yeah.
So, in terms of games, like we haven't actually talked about play yet. Right, like I have no idea like what you play for fun, right? Like we've talked about things. I have like sent you things, like you've requested items, and I've dug into my archive and shot them your way. So I have an idea of what you're conceptually interested in, but like
you tell me, what am I? You guess. Tell me what I'm conceptually interested in. You're probably right, but as an exercise, tell me what you think my taste is.
I don't know. The way I'd probably put it is like hidden gems, and like wherever those may lie, right? Like so. I think the first thing I sent you was it White Bear Red Moon?
Yeah, we had a long talk about Greg Stafford.
Yeah, we had a long talk about Stafford.
It was more like everybody's talking about this guy who died in this like saintly hagiographic way, which seems quite appropriate. But I was like, I don't fucking know this guy.
Yeah, I mean, Pendragon,
yeah.
Early stuff like that. But like your interest in it is not, I think, in its historical importance so much as like what it does that's different, and like the ways in which we miss it because we view it one way instead of another.
Yeah. I think that's true. Although I would say that like I haven't played any of those games. They're really not what I play.
And that's the thing, right? I have no idea what you play.
Yeah. So okay, I'm now having two thoughts at once. So let me put them in an order.
Okay.
One, what I'm playing right now is I'm playing in a Follow Delta Green campaign. Very exciting. I play an action librarian. I have way too many hybrid geometry points, and I fix everything with magic, which is not really how the game's supposed to work.
It's not really how Delta Green's supposed to function.
I'm still alive, so
okay.
Yeah, my stated goal is to be on the executive committee of Delta Green, which I'm very close to doing. So,
okay.
Again, don't play games you're not going to win.
Yeah,
no, but you haven't already won.
I mean, I don't know that anyone has ever successfully played Delta Green in a way where you have already won. That doesn't seem very Delta Green to me, but apparently it can be done.
I mean, very early, I established that I myself was personally Yogg-Sothoth, and that's gotten me pretty far.
Yeah, fair, okay.
Yeah, and some people listening to this context may be like, wow, this lyric game guy is playing all these weird Lovecraft games. He was a giant racist, and you're totally fucking right. And yes, I'm playing the game. I'm also playing. I also happen to have just started a Knights Black Agents campaign that I'm running.
Okay.
So you can tell this is the John Plays Games written by his personal friend Ken Hite, and
Yeah,
in a way
yeah,
that's
it's
true.
real
But
strong Pelgrane influence so far.
yeah, yeah. But on the other hand, it's that I've been hanging out with Pelgrane people, and they've been teaching me a lot, and it's been great.
Yeah,
So do with that what you will. Um, and a lot of the games, I mean, this is a conversation that's happening in a lot of places right now, so I don't want to recapitulate it right now. But a lot of the games I read for my own enjoyment as sort of a consumer of games are games that aren't really playable, right?
true.
What does one do with J Dragon's game, which you are not allowed to play punctuation? Well, you read it and you think about its historical place.
Hmm.
You don't then go play it. I like games that I have friends who want to play them with me, and that I can successfully schedule to get them played. I have felt very burned in my life by not actually playing games, and I very much privilege games that I can actually play with people.
Hell yes.
In my play life, I moved into an apartment with Darcy Ross, so that Darcy Ross and I could hang out more and play more games. And we
Do
played a
you?
shockingly few number of games
Yeah, it's
together.
like you didn't say anything about Cipher System games.
Yeah, but I mean, I ran. Speaking of working for companies, I wasn't working for them; I didn't get paid for it. But for the first 2 or 3 or 4, definitely 3 or 4 years, I went to Gen Con. I was running Monaco Games in their room. Yeah, so I've run plenty of
So then,
Cypher.
like, I've definitely met you.
Very, very possibly. You meet a lot of people at Gen Con. I have no idea.
Sure,
But,
yeah, yeah, but like the reason I know Darcy
uh-huh.
is because of my involvement with MCG stuff,
Sure,
and I
sure.
feel like I know I a good
Well,
number.
I was really sort of like did stuff for them for Gen Con, but was not really like I wasn't on like the discords and stuff for that
Well, I
otherwise.
wasn't either. I really only knew them like from basically in person, and then the work I did in my first couple of years
Uh-huh.
being
Uh-huh.
involved in the industry. But like,
Yeah. So I've done that. So yeah, John plays a lot of trad games. Is basically
fair.
the lesson here. Because all I want to do in my life is be a Res Wizards of Thay. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And no one has given me that yet. So I keep searching, right?
Just over and over.
And I have to fucking and the closest I've fucking come is being a librarian for the Library of Congress who's read too many evil Cthulhu books.
I mean, sometimes you gotta settle for second best.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I said that I think I got when I found D&D as a kid, it was like a brand on my spinal cord. Some of what I wanted out of that, right? And I've been searching after that quite successfully for a long time, and that what's the end of that thought? I don't know what the end of that thought is, but just so yeah, I going back to us being in this liminal space, right? I played tons of these trad games because they're fun
Hmm?
and I like playing them, right? Going back to play, sometimes people sometimes forget about games being fun, which is not to say that they can't be something else. They
Sure.
can't be pedagogical, they can't be insightful, they can't be emotional or whatever. I think these things can be all at once. Um, yeah, the other game I play is I'm in my dear friend Matt has run a 3.5 Heartbreaker since the beginning of time, and I'm an ancient evil vampire princess, and it's great, and I love it. It's so good. I'm bringing you about don't if you're in this game, don't listen to this, but I'm the way I've already won that game is that I'm bringing about the end of time.
That sure is a way to win.
Yeah, I want to make time compression like Ultimisia from Final Fantasy VIII happened. That's the way I'm going to win. Yeah, yeah,
R.I.P. the best Final Fantasy that'll probably never get remade.
maybe, maybe. Yeah, so okay, that was me pursuing one thought that I had, but I forgot what the other thought I was having. Yeah, so
It
those are
doesn't
the games
matter.
I played, but I'm really interested in all these other games, right? And I also play games like I play lots of I'm a museum educator. I'm dealing with kids and adult groups. I play lots of like weird, make silly faces, respond to a painting while we stand in front of
Hmm.
it kinds of games. So I play lots of those, and I ran an art gallery for a while. So some of the games I play are like performances and happenings and nothings, and even if I'm not playing them, those are some of my influences and what a game might be. So I would say that like you, I have sort of wide and varied taste. It's just that the games that I end up playing are the ones that are action-oriented things I can get five friends together in the
Sure.
kitchen for.
So regarding like your museum work and your educational work, essentially,
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
are one of, I believe, three people who work as a gallerist or a in a curatorial function of some sort in
Uh-huh.
their day job, um, and who do so involving, like, to an extent, games, right? Not
You mean three
necessarily
people in the
explicitly.
scene?
Say that again.
You mean three people in the scene?
No, like in this project.
Oh, in this project. Oh, interesting. Who are
Yeah.
those? Tell me, tell me, tell me.
Daniel Kwan
Uh-huh.
at the Royal Ontario Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure there's one other, and I'm blanking on them right now.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know. I'll put in brackets whoever it ends up being.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Shout out to that person.
yeah, shout out to that person. Sorry, I forgot about you. Um, you are the first one that I am sitting down with, though.
Oh, interesting. Sure.
So it'll be interesting to kind of compare their experiences against whatever you
Uh-huh.
say. But, like, what you work with children and adults. Like, how do you find those things relate? Right? Is it as simple as, like, sometimes you just have to do improvisational work to keep a tour going,
Relate
and,
to what?
like,
Relate to each other or relate to
each other? Yeah, yeah.
game? Oh, with kids and adults?
And games and curatorial work, like
Hmm,
in a non-expert audience, right? Because I think a lot of what we've been talking about so far is, like, curatorial work as it pertains to the insider. Um, when no, I don't think any random know nothing is going to be picking up Knucklebone.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
I don't have any real expectation
I
of that.
would, I would say that a lot of my work has to do with rejecting the category of a know nothing.
Okay.
That lots of people know lots of stuff, and often my work in being a museum educator is getting out of the way, being a sort of informed intermediary. Um, when I was trained as a docent, we did a lot of stuff, docent being a sort of museum tour guide. And we were trained in things like VTS, visual thinking strategies, and a few other kind of, industry insider kind of techniques. I don't know if I can remember the names of it anymore. But about how to sort of have this kind of guided, open-ended conversation in front of a piece of work. Okay, here's a painting. What do we see? Basing it in observation first of all, and then sort of adding context for the making of that object, for the time period of that object, for the biography of the artist, things like that over time, and to sort of fruitfully add to an organic conversation, right? Um, and that can be really fruitful in that it allows people to bring their own expertise into talking about a painting, right? You're not going in and saying like, "Ha, this is Mark Rothko, and he's an important modernist painting of the color field, abstraction field from New York or whatever," right? You're saying, I remember one of the best things, and when a kids, we were looking at this Rothko painting, and this kid's, we were like, "What does it look like?" They're like, "It looks like peanut butter and jelly," and people in the room will be like, "Oh, that's such a silly answer," and I'm like, "It does," there's a lot of truth telling in that, and I think there's a lot of acknowledging that, right? Is that kid and know nothing about Mark Rothko? No, that kid, in fact, is the one telling the truth in the room, so we should listen, you know. And so a lot of my work is making sure that we're approaching artworks in a way that allows for that kind of honesty and um, sort of clarity, right? And again, a lot of that means me getting out of the way. A lot of my work over the years has been stepping out of this like intermediate facilitator role and being like, here's the bathrooms, here's where the water fountain is. Like, let's take 20 minutes, look at this cool stuff. If you're lost, I can show you some cool stuff I like, you know? And so that's where I sort of am as a museum educator these days. And that, works for kids and adults and for everybody because it's going to them, not putting them in these boxes of what they may or may not know about art, and more being like, hell yeah, like we all know art that's worth talking about is about our lives, and so let's just talk about our lives in a way, right? um I'm pausing to think.
Sure. No, no, no. I mean, honestly, I don't think there even needs to be, like, an explicit connection between that and
Yeah, but
games,
let me
but,
think.
like, I
I'm,
think
I'm
it's
pausing to
obvious.
think. I'm pausing to think.
Go, fine, fine, fine.
Let me
Think.
think.
Whatever.
um okay, counter thought.
Sure.
So another, maybe not a counter thought, but another thing is that, so I, for a large part of my professional life as a docent, and I've done other museum things besides being a docent, but gallery education is my favorite thing to do, and I have gotten myself back into gallery education because it's what I like. Um, One thing is when you take a big group of people around a museum, there are certain kind of material necessities that are in play. Like it's hard to have a group of 10 or 15 people and talk about a tiny print.
Sure.
Much easier to talk about a big old painting. You can all stand in front of, it's easy to see, everybody can sort of access it. And that it's very approachable because of the sort of size necessities. And that's great and that's wonderful. But that means that whether or not you intend it means that you're going to talk about certain kinds of artists and certain kind of artwork that make sense in a big painting kind of way, you know? And there's other subject matters and other artists who are, for good reasons, working in smaller, maybe more intimate contexts, right? And so, but you can't take 15 people to look at a tiny print. It just doesn't work out. So another reason I'm getting out of the way of people in the galleries is because when you say like everybody look around this room, look at the paintings you think are cool, and I'm just going to stand here and yeah, I know stuff about this. Maybe I have questions. Ask me as a strategy. Is because people get to look at smaller works and they get to spend as much time as they want with them, and this is important for reasons like when I'm with a big group of 12-year-olds, I can't take them to look at a big weird queer sex painting. That just wouldn't fly, right? Um, uh, uh, no matter what size it is, if I give everybody in a room permission to look around a room, I notice that people can look at in many ways, sort of harder, stranger, more politically or sexually charged material, right? People, and often, not always, but often that stuff is smaller, more intimate. People make small prints of queer relationships or whatever, right? And if you give people time and sort of agency to go look around, people look at those things, and I can have better conversations with them. I find, um, I can go up to a group of three, middle schoolers who are kind of giggling about something, and maybe they're not giggling, but who are obviously interested in a piece that's sort of like charged for some reason. I can say like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And usually they're like, they sort of quiet down because they shouldn't have been looking. And I'm like, "I think this piece is really interesting, and here's why." And so we have much more robust conversations. Okay, so that's sort of like the state of John's thoughts about gallery education is getting out of the way
Sure.
in largest part because it's not. I think it really, in fact, deepens a lot of conversations. I come away from tours a lot more being like, we have really good conversations about some of this work, and I really feel like I got to give across stuff. Sometimes it's like, hey, just like let's take a second and like here's like who you should look up on Wikipedia to learn about this topic or whatever in a way that I couldn't do if I was in this big group.
I mean,
What does
so
that have to do with? I know you were saying that I didn't have to relate this to games, but I'm going to.
sure, please.
So I think this relates to my desire to have more and more robust conversations about games and to make them sort of open ended, right? Is because I think lots of people have stuff to say, but they may not be, just I don't know that right now the way the industry or the scene, which are really just versions of the same thing, um, provides a lot of affordances for a lot of different kinds of people or different different brains, different bodies, And so just diversifying that at all and getting out of the way and saying like, here's a I don't know if this is the best pot to cook this carbonara in, but here's a pot I've got. Let's try it. Oh, that doesn't work. Great. Well, let's try this other pot, right?
Sure.
Because otherwise, that's not sort of. I don't want to say again. I don't want to say that's not happening, but I want to help with that process.
Sure.
So in a way, me being like, "Hey, come submit stuff to my weird game rag," is me just being is in a way me getting out of the way.
Yeah, I mean
I
that's kind
think
of the weird thing is that like it is simultaneously you injecting yourself and you extricating yourself.
indeed.
Um, like it wouldn't if it was pure extrication, there'd be no way you could run a
Mhm.
new entity.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly right.
so one of the things that I think we have maybe the most different thoughts
Mhm.
on, because we do have a lot of shared thoughts, is the responsibility of a work and its reception.
Okay.
Um, Big topic, I know. But
Uh-huh.
right now, there's one very specific domain that I want to relate it to right now, which is if Knucklebone, or whatever it comes out as
Mhm.
named, um, comes out, it's a good artifact. It's a good physical publication.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it's negatively received
Sure.
because the industry is not ready for that kind of critical forum or for any other number of reasons.
Uh-huh.
Do you continue it? Do you continue it essentially against the wishes of the Gestalt?
Well, I mean, define. I mean, you've set me up a weird puzzle. You said it's both good and also no one likes it. So
Yeah,
like, so then, you know, my no matter how this particular thing, my basic project is to like be involved in this industry scene in a sort of meaningful way. And if it's ignored, then I'll do a different strategy. But if
sure.
it, you know, but if I think that if it's I don't want to get into a I don't want to paint myself into a corner where I say something that's
Dude, you
something that is ignored
you
is
are you are
ignored because it's
drinking.
bad.
Nobody is watching this, and by the time anybody reads it, if you had been successful, you'd be on like your fourth or fifth issue at least.
Says
So
you.
like,
Says you. No, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about it theoretically, right? It's I just want to say like if it's good, I want to keep doing it, and if it sucks, then I'll stop doing it. Or if I
fair,
get bored, I'll stop doing it. Or if I am sad, I'll stop doing it. Right? It's um the best when I was running a queer art gallery, the best advice I ever got was from a lady who's well known in the sort of indie Chicago art scene. Her name is Laura Schaefer. She's been in charge of a lot of sort of indie spaces, and she and I sort of become friends over time. Her kid, by the way, happened to be in the D&D group I ran for kids at yeah. Um, and it was when I was running this little gallery, which was called the Condo Association, was a sort of explicitly queer, explicitly anti-capitalist little gallery we were running. And we were having some sort of tough times. We were having sort of internal disagreements and stuff. And I went to Laura and I was like, Laura, you've been doing this for a long time. What the fuck? How do you get it to work? And she says, you just iterate. You just do projects over and over again. And they have a life. And sometimes you look up and you say, hell yeah, I'm gonna keep this going. And sometimes you say, nope, this is over, right? So I'm not, I appreciate the question. It's a good question. Obviously, I'll sort of mull over, but I'm really going to this as like, just start stuff, see
sure.
where it goes. If it's being ignored, then it's being ignored, and we'll move on.
Mm-hmm.
If it's good and ignored, great. The only way that category is ever any way useful is if it is later retroactively found to be useful. So like, you know,
Sure.
um, uh, that's my answer, right? I'm not a prognosticator. I'm just to do some shit and see what happens kind of person.
Fair. Um,
Now, if it fucking takes over, hell yeah, and I'll like whatever. I'll get some staff. I'll get some fucking collect my Pulitzer and redistribute my wealth accordingly.
um, so in terms of like pursuing things from, I want to say essentially like a joyous standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
like what has you excited right now?
Um, in Gameland,
Sure.
I'm excited about lyric games. Earlier we talked about the death knell of lyric games. Let's not overemphasize that. All of these things are in flux all the time, right?
Mhm.
And I've been careful to say like this word was useful for a hot second. Obviously, it was useful. People used it,
Mhm.
right? Therefore, QED. But if it stops being useful a day from now, fine. Like people are still making stuff and people are still going on, and I'm excited that there is still that energy, right? Um, Now I'm curious to see where that energy goes, and if it stays on. I mean, I think COVID has been a thing that is changing all of this in ways that we just don't have the distance to know,
Yeah.
right? I was talking with a friend of mine who was like, Twitter feels different now. And I was like, I bet it
It's
does.
weird.
Um, so what am I excited about? I'm excited about the political season because I get to have a lot of political arguments, which I like having. Um, I'm excited about the ways all of this is radicalized. All of this meaning politically, globally, this is radicalizing people.
Hmm.
You haven't noticed I think a lot about politics. I have pretty radical politics,
Yeah, I
and
no, I it's hard to ignore.
yeah, and I am excited that this is percolating in various directions for that. Where it's all going to go, I don't know, but I think it's hard to be excited in this global situation.
Sure.
But on the other hand, you know, um, I think there's a lot of eye opening going on. I remember my aunt was telling me about this isn't the America I remember. This isn't the America I remember. And I was like, well, fucking pay attention.
Yeah.
God damn, like, what are you talking about? Right?
What
My
is the
introduction to
America
America
you
was
remember?
everyone said I was going to hell for being gay. So that's pretty coded my relationship to America as
Yeah.
this thing, right? And I think that above anything else has shaped my politics to this day. So, like, what am I excited about? I'm excited about the fucking collapse of the American empire. Um, that's not the same as saying that I'm hopeful about it or project it's happening anytime soon. I guess. How does that play out in Game Land? Um, what am I excited about in Game Land? I'm excited about people making weird little games, right? And I also want what I want is people to make weird big games, right? Several people, when lyric as a word for a thing happened, were like, hey, the utility of this word is that lyric is easily and historically juxtaposed against epic games. And what I want are some epic games that are, I think they'll be related to, but distinct from trad games, which is a bad category anyway.
Sure.
Um, but like I'm excited about Delver. I haven't yet
Hmm.
played Delver. I want to. Nora Blake made a surrealist dungeon crawl game,
Hmm.
Delver. Um, Taylor LaBresh, who I keep bringing up because he's a great designer, made, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's something like, there is no way out of this dungeon, and the reward at the end of this dungeon is that you may be out of this dungeon, but you can't because there's no way out of this dungeon, right?
Yeah.
I think lyric energy sort of looping back into, maybe that's a bad spatial metaphor, but looping back into um, some of the roots of role-playing games, that's what excites me, you know.
I mean, how?
And do I think that's related to the politics that I just charted out? I think so, but I don't know why.
I mean, I'm
I
more
think
than
because
happy. I'm
dungeon,
more
I
than
think
happy to
because,
let you sit on it.
huh?
I'm more than happy to let you sit on that thought. If you do have a way that you find them connected, that would be very interesting to me.
Do you know who K-Punk is? Mark Fisher.
No.
All right, so I've been reading the work of a contemporary philosopher recently named K-Punk. Basically, somebody on RPG Twitter brought up Brecht, and I thought I disagreed with them about Brecht, and I was like, John, you haven't actually read any Brecht. So I went to one of the world's largest research libraries, which is in my neighborhood, and I was looking around for Brecht, but I forgot his name, and so instead I got a book on Roland Barthes. So I was reading Roland Barthes, and fucking loved it. Barthes my guy. I'm all
Yeah.
about it. Um,
Very,
and,
very different.
are they? Probably. Who
Yeah.
knows? I continue to have not read any Brecht, so who knows? Um, First game I put out into the world was about Zaum and Russian
Okay.
objectivism. No, I'm going to get the right word. Russian suprematism out there. So Breck and I have flirted across a shady gay bar. So I'm reading about Roland Barthes, right? Who famously is one of the people who got famous for the idea of the death of the author, and that's not even
Mm-hmm.
really what I've been reading about and whatever. But it was just so good to have an old dead gay guy read some old French books and tell me about why they were cool. It was so good. I just loved it, every minute of it. I was reading his book, Camera Lucida, which is about, which starts out in like a perfect way. He's like, I like photography. Photography sucks. Which is why I should probably figure out why people like it. So the whole book is him grappling with why photographs, right? And it's really good because he finds he's like, okay, I like this photograph. So what do I like about this photograph? This in here, this must be what's good about photographs. He's using his own. This is going to get psychoanalytical, but his own sort of libido to determine goodness, right? Because what else can you do? Um, so and I was fucking loving that bullshit. I was fucking loving reading Roland Barthes. He's my guy now. And so suddenly I was on Wikipedia reading about Lacan and being like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. And so then I was reading about Mark Fisher, who committed suicide in 2007 because he was very depressed and he was British and he loved Joy Division. He was essentially a music critic who had a very popular blog for a long time called K-Punk. And was looking at some of his books. His first book is called The Capitalist Realism, which is the idea very relevant to my own thinking, which is that the way contemporary capitalism works, it has made it impossible to imagine alternatives, thus the nightmare hellscape that is Joe Biden.
Sure.
Um, and so I was like, that's intriguing. And then his second book is about, it's called Ghosts of My Life. Here. Writings on Depression, Hauntology, and Lost Futures. This idea of hauntology is something that Derrida or Lacan or some fucker came up with. But it's about lost futures. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot and didn't really have a word for yet. And so I immediately bought this book and I've been reading it and enjoying it a lot. Okay, so why, okay, John, why this big long discussion of these authors? Because I think that my life as a game man is in many ways haunted by futures that could have happened. I think this has to do with what if we lived in a world where people didn't care who you wanted to have sex with? What if we lived in a world where the AIDS crisis hadn't happened? What if we lived in a world where the AIDS crisis had happened and Reagan hadn't been a shitty fuck up? Um, and on and on and on and on. I think a lot of my politics and the games I've put out there are really informed by the experiences of being in like gay sex clubs, the sort of annihilating, personally revelatory experience of like, sucking on a big dick through a chain link fence in a dark German club. Um, and all of that has to do with hauntology, I think, about futures that could have been. In Chicago, for the last few years, there's a bunch of old gay sex spaces that have slowly been closing just because there's lack, after the terrible hellscape that is gays entering the military and the terrible hellscape that is gay marriage. Um, Certain spaces like this sort of no longer have utility, and things like Grindr are making sex clubs less of a thing. Anyway, so what's happening in my experience is that a culture that I was born into already in a ghost state is further collapsing all around me. And that's just like Dungeons and Dragons. The best writing about dungeon crawls, I think, is from the school of thought about them being about decay, about them being about landscapes that are sort of smoldering and moldering into themselves, sort of uncovering memories. And of course, there's a sort of very critiquable Orientalist angle to all of that. That's true. Something that Mabel Harper was teaching me about was the idea of, taking the metaphorical nature of dungeon crawls and really turning that dial to 47. Um, Dungeon crawl as allegory, right? And I've been thinking for a long time about trying to make a gay sex club into a dungeon crawl, for example.
I don't
Because
actually think that would be very hard.
no, I don't think so either. But like how to do it? No, I think you could have a minimally viable gay sex club dungeon pretty fast.
Yeah.
But to make one that is interesting and captures a lot of what's going on at gay sex clubs, that's the thing I've been working on. But I've been distracted by other things that haven't finished, right? Anyway, so that's all just like a big cloud of word vomit out into the world of thoughts I've been having really recently about the relationship between what we are up to as we imagine things, right? As we imagine the past, as we imagine possible futures, what are the political dimensions about that? And how can we use game writing as a technology to facilitate that, right? You know,
That's shockingly cogent for word vomit.
yeah.
That's I was able to follow it
Yeah, so those are
better
my
than
thoughts
most.
about games and play. One of my primary interests is in the epistemological dimensions of play, how we learn through play slash what just not what do we learn through play, but what kind of knowing is play itself. And I think
Okay.
a large part of it is about the imagining possible futures. Why should people play role-playing games? Because they might help you imagine alternatives to capitalism.
Sure. I mean, that goes way far back.
Say more.
Well, I mean, play as ritual, right? Is fundamentally play as safe imaginative space for other worlds.
I think that's what rituals are. I think rituals are about the reconcretization of worldviews, about the making them material and performing them. Um, yeah, which is a big thought that I'm going to move on from. So I don't like talking about. I spent too much time dropping out of religious studies grad school to drop the word ritual and how rituals are liberatory all over the place because I don't think that's true.
It's fair.
Um, but um, I do think a lot about how it. You and I have talked a lot about the history of the industry of role playing games and the
Hmm.
history of what this is, right? And I think that there are many ways to tell that story. One of them is that once upon a time, some dudes in Wisconsin got together and said, "Hey, what if we like took our Warhammer sets?" It's like anachronistic, but you know what I mean. Took our Warhammer sets and decided that actually I was the fucking paladin, right? I'm gesturing at the birth of D&D, right?
Yes.
Um, and I think that's only one way of telling that story. Another way of telling that story, where I would go, that's not exactly ritual, although I realize these things are related,
Sure.
be just playgrounds and other kinds of open-ended child play, right? You know,
So
why
within early anthropological game studies, or what
uh,
we would consider to end up becoming game studies, right?
you're talking
Because
about
it certainly
Huizinga
wasn't that.
here?
Hmm?
You're talking about Huizinga? I'm not sure
Yeah,
what
yeah.
the
So like everything from Huizinga through to like Kalwa, right?
okay,
Like
you're
so.
you're referencing things that I have skipped my thoughts across the pond of those discussions, but I have not read them deeply.
Fair. So like there is a point at which you get to what's essentially like an understanding of play that is separate entirely from ritual.
Mm-hmm.
But in that period of like the late 1800s to basically the mid 1950s,
Yeah,
that's the predominant theory,
yeah,
and it comes from the anthropological with Zinga, the
yeah.
developmental psychological with Winnicott, the pure critical with like Kawa, and like everything in between. It then shifts away from that, but I think there is enough of a coherent and pretty decent argument made in like a 65-year period across a whole bunch of different authors where it's like, yeah, I get your point about ritual as non-liberatory. I do not think that is inherent in ritual so much as pre- prevalent within ritual.
Okay.
And within the context of play, I think it can be different. And what people are talking, when people talk about playground spaces, like of the mind essentially, I see that as a ritualized form
Uh-huh,
of
uh-huh,
creativity.
uh-huh. I don't know. I'm great. I'm glad you have those thoughts. What I'm trying to
Fair.
say is that I think there are ritual aspects of kids playing house, and you could shave that, you could whittle that thought into lots of different shapes. Okay, fine. Put that over there. What I'm trying to say is about the telling of the history of the industry,
Sure.
and that I think that people put a lot of emphasis on the Gary Gygax-Zarnsenian telling of that story. What would it be like if we told more of the like kids world back? Kids world was my preschool, the sort of kids world version of that story, right? And I think that's a lot of what people are rediscovering in lyric games and stuff is just bringing that kind of. I think it's not nothing that several of the people who are pumping out a bunch of what I call lyric stuff are people who are involved in kids education, like people like
Sure.
Sleepaway from Day Dragon, for example, is a big
I
part of that.
book I edited.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well,
And
there you
yeah,
go.
and am in kids education. It's
Yeah,
my day
there you
business.
go. See, yeah, see, I didn't
So
know
I
that.
get
So
it.
yeah.
I do. Um, I guess what does that history look like in practice? There is a point at which it makes sense.
Oh,
I don't think you can originate with that point because kids weren't the one who started it.
when's the one who started what?
Like if we're talking about an evolutionary history of RPGs,
Okay.
when do kids matter? Like
See,
when
this
do
is
kids
this is
practically matter?
this is what I'm saying because what I'm trying to say is that there is a way of telling the story that is about the industry, and then there's a way of telling the story as all the people who newly come into the zone,
Sure, I
right?
mean we have text like that. right? Like
Yeah.
that's that is fucking oh my god, a massive tome, 700-page book just about like the origin of D&D specifically in like a like concrete way. It's like the most important book in RPG histories. John Peterson wrote it. Um,
Yeah,
Peters.
I feel like we're just not. I think we're talking past each other because that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying like there are other histories to be told. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
How did we get onto this?
I don't know. This might be John's drunk now part of it,
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
not. What I'm saying is not that like there aren't histories of the evolution of the industry. No, what I'm saying is another thing that is important is another way you can tell the story is just by saying kids go outside and play, and that's important.
Sure.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay. It's gonna be interesting going back and watching this like in an
Uh,
hour because I feel like when you started it was as a counterpoint.
to what?
That's what I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
Yeah.
Okay, well, fine. We'll move on.
Um, I'll DM you when I go back and watch it.
Yeah,
I'll,
yeah, 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 yeah.
um,
Uh,
because
well,
I don't disagree
whatever
with
point I
that
was
at
trying to
all.
make, my point is, in our world, there's both the industry and there's the rest of it. And I think
Sure.
yeah, and I guess we were talking about ritual and play and ritual stuff like that. And I'm basically saying, like, I have too much baggage about the world ritual um, to want to get into a long conversation about it. Yes, okay, I'm reconstructing this conversation in my brain.
Yeah, I feel like you introduced the idea that there are other ways to tell the history was as a direct counterpoint to me explaining the ritual. That's the thing is I think I know what the last thing we were talking about was, and I don't see how they connect.
Well,
Um,
cool. This is all fine. We can
that's
work
good.
that in post.
Yeah,
Um,
there's no editing for this. This is getting transcribed exactly as it happened, so it's gonna be great.
okay. Well,
Um,
that's a shitty way to do it.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm not editing for cohesion or clarity. I'm editing for getting rid of ums and likes. Um,
How does that matter in a transcript?
ums and
You're gonna take,
likes.
you're gonna take out the literal ums and likes.
Yeah,
Yeah. So why? So here's a question for you. Um, you also have this curatorial. I use that word because it's where my day job is, but
sure,
this editorial word, this sort of synthetic synthesis mind, right?
sure,
So, why this project? I want to know because in a way you're doing something similar to what I'm trying to do with Knucklebone or whatever, right?
sure.
To get people talking about stuff.
I
And you're approaching. I mean, the introduction of sort of drunken rambling is an interesting way to approach that. And I think my guess, this is me conjecturing, is that it's about um, something like authenticity, off the cuffitude.
I mean that's the conceit.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think the difference between me and you, me and Jared, me and like most of the other people who occupy roughly the same kind of space.
Uh-huh. The other old man.
Yeah, the other old men.
Okay.
Um, the other people who were like curatorial, synthetic,
Mm-hmm.
those words, um, is I am much farther along toward what I'd consider the archival end of the spectrum
Sure.
than most other people. Um, I like hearing new voices and I like hearing new thoughts. And I always want more of that. But however much I like hearing them, I'm much more interested in them being recorded.
Uh-huh. And why?
Because my great trauma is all to do with informational loss.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I have an atrocious memory.
I see. I've been thinking about memory a lot too. Yes.
And I've always had an atrocious memory, and it's only
Uh-huh.
worsening. I could imagine myself having something akin to dementia in 10
I
years.
understand. I understand.
So for me, the hoarding of information is even better than the generation of information.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, I have read a lot of interviews with designers. I've read
Yeah,
a lot of pieces that they've written about themselves.
yeah.
They are all either quite dull or quite specific.
Uh-huh.
3 questions about how your design process works.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Pretty boring.
yeah, I don't care. It doesn't actually tell me much that's useful beyond what I already have 1,000 times over.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you get people drunk and you let them ramble and you don't cut out all the shit.
Yeah, sure.
That's to me a valuable historical artifact.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Uh,
You have a kind of you ever heard of Stud Sturkle?
no.
Stud Turkle, excuse me. He's a guy I don't really know anything about, but he's famous in Chicago as being kind of the famous man on the street interviewer who just went out into the
Okay.
world all across Chicago. This is in I think like the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I could be wrong. Um, that was sort of his gig, and he kind of now people are like, wow, him just like talking to randos on the street is like that's actually very useful. Yeah, I mean, as is probably clear, I have a sort of history background, and so I think that data security, yes, is quite important. Um, you ever read? How much do you know about the idea of queer futurity?
The bare minimum.
Okay, well,
Knowledge by
I'm
osmosis.
no expert. I'm no expert, but let me chart you out my working knowledge of
Okay.
this. Someone whose name I think was Lee Edelman said something like a queer way of approaching life is well, we don't have kids. Who cares if we have kids? Who cares about the world continuing beyond our lives? Doesn't fucking matter. Let's just live our lives now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so why not do a bunch of drugs and go out in a blaze of blitzed out glory? Like what's morally wrong about that, right?
Sure.
Or why must we organize society around the idea of children if we're people who aren't interested in children? And this is a strong and very impactful argument.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of robust discussion about all sides. And other people have come and said, no, actually, that's not queer futurity at all. That's queer futurity is this idea of imagining alternate timelines, right? The idea of like I'm thinking of something called the Fathers Project, which was a movie that came out recently, um, wherein the conceit is what if AIDS hadn't happened, and what if all of these gay men who had died were still around,
Okay.
and taking I think um, one example I remember sort of like what if Robert Mapplethorpe hadn't died,
Sure.
something like that, and then taking that into I think the um, director of that movie was like actually during the process of it I learned that actually people have these alternate timelines happening all over. It's things like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence or other kinds of queer utopian movements.
Sure.
And that's a different kind of charting out of queer futurity, right? And then I myself have talked about this kind of haunting, this hauntology, a queer hauntology that I was working out for you about my relationship to gay sex spaces. And a lot of that has to do with both the archive and the importance of the archive, but it's also kind of a rejection of the archive impulse in as much
Sure.
as it is saying, well, what I mean to say is I'm thinking about all these things, and they are also about memory, and they are about memory loss or the creation of new fraudulent memories, and
Mm-hmm.
whether that could be good or could be bad, right?
I mean, so
My
I just to
yeah,
interject, right? Like, I have a very deep lived relationship to that contradiction of sorts,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, I today am 7 years sober.
Mm-hmm.
You don't generally get sober unless you have a pretty substantial substance abuse problem. I
Sure,
started early on because I wanted to delete my memory to be free of it.
sure.
I wanted to utterly disappear. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
take the why organize society around kids concept to the most reductio ad absurdum I could.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Why have any continuance? And I have throughout my entire life just gone back and forth between put me in a jar and never let me die
Uh-huh.
and kill me 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely, definitely.
and I get it. And like that's just this is a cycle of trauma. And you know the what if AIDS never happened? I probably would be a different person
Hmm,
because
hmm.
like my earliest memories are people existing and then not existing.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely, definitely.
and it's like I get it. These things operate. The thing about two sides of the same coin is that they're the same coin.
Hmm, hmm.
You just flip it and then it's the other side. Um, but for me, I don't know. So much of the so much of what we have of this hobby, this industry, this form is transient. Um, even when it's not meant to be, it just doesn't. There's nobody cataloging. There's nobody keeping safe. There's so much of it that's simply lost. Like we talk when I think about film history, right? The amount of nitrate that's just gone.
Hmm.
Films we know existed
Yeah, sure.
that just are we will never have important films,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
By
yeah,
like
yeah.
major figures, and they're forever. Um, I don't want us to wake up into a situation if we're around in 20 years as a civilization and as if
Mhm,
we're
mhm.
around in 20 years as a form. I
Right,
don't want
right.
us to wake up and not know our origins.
Sure.
And can we can recontextualize those origins better with more information? Is
Yeah,
like
sure. And I think that like what I'm about to say, I'm not saying is some sort of like counterpoint or
sure,
argument against it, but this is going to be like a yes and,
sure.
which is and maybe I'm totally thinking out loud right now, but maybe my impulse is answering some of the same stuff of being like if we might not have a future, then we should have what we're imagining now, and we should just make the cool fucking scene happen. Like it can just be now, right?
Sure.
A lot of what I'm reading about this Mark Fisher guy has to do with his whole idea of capitalist realism is not only the idea that we can't imagine a world outside of capitalism, but that time has kind of congealed to a stop. Now that we have, and
Mm-hmm.
this is very relevant to what we're talking about, now that the internet gives us access to basically all, well, not all, but a very Swiss cheese version of all of time, we just keep looping back into other styles, other concerns, other stuff, right? And we've lost a sense of that there's the future, right?
Fukuyama wasn't wrong. He was just early. Um,
Uh, uh, well, but Fukuyama was a capitalist,
sure.
um, and so yeah, he was wrong. but that you know we can't even conceive what it would be like. A lot of what Mark Fisher talks about is like that music from today. Like it's hard to tell where this sort of avant-garde is. Is there sort of even one? And I mean, avant-garde is already a complicated phrase because it's all about a war metaphor. But like, where's the new stuff? Where is the new? Can you find it? And I'm not sure. It's hard, right? But I want it because again, I want to be able to imagine and search for other versions of reality, right? And I think we have to sort of be pushing in our creative life to make that happen. And the only way to prove Mark Fisher wrong about this congealment is to go find a future, right? And
Sure.
start and try to make it. And that gets you into this haunted place because then you get into the spiral of is it possible, is it not possible, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's why I found all of this writing about. I don't want to oversize this Mark Fisher guy, who I really only kind of just encountered, but he's just really been saying a lot of things that I've been thinking on for a long time about loss, memory loss, cultural loss, the future. Where is the future? What could the future look like? Right now everything is Fallout, everything's retro all the time, right? And I think that the idea is that like, yeah, maybe these cultural sort of cycles are real, but like, hey, wait, did the cycle kind of get stuck? Are we kind of looping over the
Yeah.
same territory over and over again? In a sort of like, wow, isn't it interesting that everything more or less has to do with the so-called end of communism and the hegemony of global capitalism. Isn't that, oh, what a coincidence that these things congeal around each other. So yeah, without the fashy angles on the futurists, what I want is a new RPG futurism.
Okay.
Is it impossible? Maybe, but
Yeah.
I'm
I
not
mean,
going to
who
leave it
knows?
aside.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Um, but if it's real and it's out there, I figure,
Well, it's not out there because it doesn't you have to make it. That's the point.
yeah, but you don't.
Yeah, but we do.
We do.
Yeah.
That's very different.
Uh-huh.
Um, this is probably the last. We're at an hour and a half, which is
Cool.
awesome. This is exactly the amount of time. Um, I don't disagree with you that
Uh-huh.
we,
Sounds like you
capital
do.
W.
Sounds like you do.
No. That's fair. I don't disagree that we, capital W, need to create it. And it doesn't just appear on its own.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there's a material difference between that and we, little w.
Okay, I'm listening, but what do you mean?
This goes back to
I don't believe in God. Let's make that clear.
Sure.
I think the difference you're charting out is probably one that I would interpret as one involving the sort of um, not the supernatural, but the kind of the the charmingly abstract capital W seems a lot like a capital G.
I do not mean it like that. At best, I mean it like the social collective, right?
Okay.
The scene is capital W.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
but a conversation we've had many times, and that I don't really want to rehash here, because I think it'll just take too long,
Yeah.
is the importance of having a critical apparatus outside of the design community
Mm-hmm.
that interacts with the design community, but is not of the design community.
Sure.
And to what extent, when we talk about capital WB, the collective, needing to create the
Okay.
future,
I now don't understand what you mean by lowercase we.
the individuals who, here literally I'm talking about you and me,
Okay.
who sit or seek to sit astride it, right? Knucklebone.
Mm-hmm.
Any other analog game studies. Like there are publications that do this work.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked again about my feeling that to do the work to the best standard, it needs to have some critical distance. Do those people have the same responsibility to build that future? Are they even helpful in helping to construct it? Or is their purpose to...
Which you mean those? You said those people. What do you mean those people?
The people who maintain the critical distance from the people who make the scene.
I'm thinking. Does everyone have a responsibility to overthrow capitalism? Not in a categorical imperative sort of way, but if we would like things to not be so shitty kind of way, yes.
Okay. That's an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even necessarily object.
Yeah.
I probably in different scenarios have slightly different answers, but taking the example of capitalism, yeah, fuck it, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, capitalism's the problem, in my opinion. So
Sure.
if we're talking about fixing the problem, then that's it. I mean, oh, fine. Let's go one metaphor higher.
Sure.
I think of myself as a sort of anti-hierarchicalist.
Okay.
That's a bunch of syllables that don't mean anything.
Just
I
you
identify
don't like
politically.
hierarchies.
I don't like hierarchies, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I want people's lives to be cool.
You want shit to be flat.
Yeah. Well,
All right.
I want stuff to be good.
Sure. No. I get it. I'm using the people who seem to hate hierarchies the most.
Mm-hmm.
They're obviously like full-on ANCAPs and like that
Well,
side
no,
of
I mean,
things.
excuse me, ANCAPs are fucking capitalists. They're pro hierarchy. Don't get mixed up about that.
Really?
Yeah, an anarcho-capitalist, capitalists love hierarchy. That's what capitalism is.
Oh, fair. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was thinking ANCAP is anti-capitalist, but that is not what that stands for at all.
That's not what it means.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
If you say anti-capitalist, then yes.
Yeah, yeah.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Um, there are people who object to hierarchies from a revolutionary political standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are also people who object to hierarchies because they don't like them, and I feel like in that latter camp, you have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of like tech people, and they talk about the world being flat as
Okay,
their
well,
version.
sure, I hear you. I don't know what that discourse is.
That's
Yeah.
fair. Um, anyway, hour 35. This has been fun.
Nice, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I would have ended up that weird bit in the middle where we just couldn't remember what we were saying.
No, it's
But,
fine. I'm
but
gonna leave that shit in, and people are gonna have to slog through it, and it's
you
gonna be great.
know what? I do. I'm all that. Okay, cool. Check me out at Cartwheel. Check me out, cartwheel.itch.io. There's no H. If you vote for Joe Biden, you're a failure and I hate you. And um, hey, great to talk to you. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you
I
for.
don't, you're not a failure. I don't hate you. I just think your politics are awful and you should change them.
I get it. Yeah, no, no, no. You can go with the stronger version. It's
Yeah, but
okay.
I'm retracting the stronger version. I like the stronger version.
It's fair. Thank you for easily the most combative interview yet. I expected no less. It was excellent.
I remember one of our not our first, but one of our early interactions. You were like, "Well, I'm a modernist," and I was like, "Defend yourself."
Yep, yeah. And then I spent like an hour with you going back and forth on like what exactly modernism means in a holistic sense. That was like
Yeah,
one of
yeah,
our first conversations.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, still think of
Cool.
myself as a modernist.
That's
Still have a
fine.
great time talking to you.
That's fine.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
when the
I don't talk about it.
yeah, when
I'm
the
just gonna
world
mumble in the microphone for a while so that you don't know what to do with that. Yeah. Let the sign erupt out from the signifier or whichever direction that's supposed to go. Barth was right. See you later. Bye.